Oak City Move is a podcast on WKNC's 88.1 FM HD1 Raleigh where we highlight people and organizations creating positive change in the Triangle and beyond. Oak City Move can be heard on air every other Monday on 88.1 FM HD1 Raleigh or online at wknc.org/listen. For episodes and more information, go to our blog at blog.wknc.org or follow us on SoundCloud at WKNC881. Hello, WKNC Raleigh. The song you just heard was Sweaty Linen by Surf Ninja 3. I'm Sophia Magnanini, your host, and you're listening to Oak City Move. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Dave Klemp, Executive Director of Trees for the Triangle. If you wanted to start off by saying a little bit about yourself, and then also for listeners who aren't too known about the Trees for Triangle, could you kind of tell us about that and how the mission has evolved?
Sure, yeah. My name's Dave, as you mentioned, and I am the Executive Director of Trees for the Triangle. I founded Trees for the Triangle back in 2017. I'm an NC State, what's the proper word? Alumnus? I can't ever remember. But I graduated with a degree in forest management from NC State. I'm also a former WKNC hanger arounder. I don't know what my title was, but I worked on Eye on the Triangle.
Oh, perfect.
So it's a cool little full circle moment for me. But yeah, so I was studying forestry at State, and then I got really interested in urban forestry and got a job with the city of Raleigh for a few years, working part-time with their Neighborhoods program, which was a free tree program within the city of Raleigh. And so when that got wound down, that was probably, I think, 2016 when they shut that down. So I just thought somebody still needed to be planting trees in Raleigh and elsewhere as well. So I started Trees for the Triangle to kind of be a successor to that to some degree. Knowing that we needed somebody planting trees, and there had been another nonprofit based in Raleigh that had also kind of recently wound down. So there was a gap to be filled and a need for trees. So I just took an online course on how to start a nonprofit and went from there. And so 2017 we got founded. 2018 we got our 501c3 status, which is a big deal. Because then you're kind of a quote unquote legitimate nonprofit once you've got that status. And I've forgotten the rest of your question.
No, that's perfect. That's so cool that, like, not only did you kind of grow, I mean, yeah, you were from around here, and then you're giving back to around here also, which is so cool, because I know a lot of people that are in forestry, and then a lot of them more recently have been thinking about going into the urban forestry like you have, which I feel like is very, very important for, especially like now in the Triangle, there's so many people moving in here and new developments being built. But then we also kind of have to combat that with also making sure that like our forests stay intact and that we have enough trees. The second part of my question was, how have you seen Trees for the Triangle evolve over the years since its founding?
Oh, well, okay. Pretty big leaps and bounds over a good number of years now. But I mean, I started, I was volunteering my time, using my personal car, driving up to Wake Forest to borrow my parents' trailer so I could move trees around. And I started with a small board of just 3 people. And then over time, as we've kind of garnered interest and more people have been looking for ways to help with trees, we've been able to grow up our board. I eventually became a paid staff member, the first, and then now we actually have 5 or 6 folks on staff. And that's crazy. Really, in the last year, we've done a lot of growth in the staff capacity so we could take on bigger projects. I'm happy to say I'm sitting in our a dedicated truck right now, actually, with its own trailer attached to it, so I can move lots and lots of trees all over the place. And how we've evolved has just been that we've been trying to grow our capacity to do the same thing we always wanted to do. So, um, we are still planting trees. We still want to plant trees everywhere we can, whether that's people's homes, schools, churches, fire stations, parks, whatever. Anything we can think of or anything that people ask us for help with, that's where we're going to go. And we do plant native trees to North Carolina, um, which was always a goal, but more recently we made it an official, like, this is definitely part of our mission. Um, yeah, so what we do isn't changing too much, thankfully, because really what's changing is just our ability to do more of it,
Mhm.
hopefully, over time.
That's really great to hear, especially seeing because I mean, you guys are still a relatively younger nonprofit, but just how it started out from the the passion of it all, and then now you guys are able to expand on your projects and as well as get paid for doing it and get paid for helping the communities, which is really cool. And also I really love the native trees that you guys are planting. What areas would you say you kind of spend the most time planting trees? Would it be like neighborhoods or just different areas?
Well, to start with, we're I founded Trees for the Triangle as the world's first pay what you can tree planting program.
Mm.
And so a lot of the focus was residential trees. A lot of the focus still is residential trees, but um, as we grew and then got our 501(c)(3), so we could start applying for grants and things. Some of the things we've applied for have been um, to do our program called Shade for Schools, which is a school campus planting program. So we've been doing some of that. Um, but yeah, a lot of our central, that kind of core central model, that pay what you can program, is really based around residential trees because residences are what we have a lot of here, and we're losing a lot of trees either at older homes where they're losing trees and need replacements, or when we're building new developments and new
Mm.
neighborhoods where they've been clear cut. There's obviously a huge need then to plant back. Um, if we can't prevent the clear cut, and sometimes you can't, or whatever factors go into that, at least I just kind of, I use the metaphor a lot of I feel like we're like battlefield medics, just kind of scurrying back and forth to different places where we've just lost a bunch of trees, and like trying to get trees back in place in some of those places. So a lot of residential, but I mean, like I said, we want to do trees everywhere, and our motto is trees for all. So trees everywhere for all people.
That's awesome. That kind of leads into my next question. I mean, your organization, like you were saying, the pay what you can. How do you guys kind of help ensure that the tree planting efforts are kind of equal across different neighborhoods, or is there specific neighborhoods that you guys visit more? Is it just kind of depends on what's being built up, what's happening, what trees are like being lost, what trees are being gained?
Yeah, I started with kind of just the scattershot approach of wherever I get asked to plant trees is where I'm going to plant trees. And, when you don't have a huge marketing budget, which I still don't, would love one, but I don't have
Hmm.
that. Your reach is only so large. So, I think it tends to be people with means who are looking for trees,
Hmm.
Googling tree planting, that found me and asked for trees. But as we've been growing, we're trying to take on more of that equity um, focus, and hitting neighborhoods that have been historically disadvantaged, or the neighborhoods that are, break out multiple factors: low income or high heat island
Hmm.
effect, or a flood prone, these different things where putting trees into the situation can help. Um, and then always from the very beginning, Um, and I always give credit to A Place at the Table. I don't know if you're familiar
Yes, I actually
with
have interviewed them earlier this year.
Maggie.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I always love give them the credit because I say I lovingly ripped off that pay what you can model from them because they had just gotten started and I was just forming, okay, well, what is this trees for the triangle thing gonna be?
Mm,
And I knew I was gonna pull a lot from neighbor woods for inspiration for the tree planting side of things, but I just loved that pay what you can model so that everyone gets a chance to get, in their case, a hot breakfast, but in my case, a new tree planted in your yard. Um, and so I kind of merged those two core like ideas and that's what Trees for the Triangle was. So that was baked into the beginning was I want, if you're worried about, paying a bill or getting a tree, like pay the bill and we'll cover the tree. And then, that's where the suggested donation per tree kicks in. So that if somebody pays, right now our suggested donation per tree is $120 for a 7-gallon tree. Um, and so if you pay that and I can do it for 100 or 110 and I can eke out a little, quote unquote profit margin,
mm,
you know, every 10 people that pay the full donation, I can plant a free tree for somebody that can't pay at all. Or, it kind of just balances out in that
mm.
way. So that was always the thought was I don't want to discourage anybody from getting trees who needs one. And everybody just about needs one. If you're in a brand new neighborhood in West Cary, guess what? You've got no trees there. It's scalding hot in August. If you're in Southeast Raleigh, living in maybe a little bit older house, you've probably lost some trees over time. And if you didn't have the funds to replace them, we want to help there too. So it's across that full spectrum. So trees for all being our motto. We're trying to live up to that.
That's really really awesome. Cause yeah, like you're saying, the Pay What You Can program, it just makes gives so many people more options and allows them to take advantage of what you guys are doing. That kind of
Hmm.
also leads into my next question. Um, could you kind of explain to listeners the importance of urban forestry in communities like those in the Triangle region that you're planting these new trees?
Yeah, urban forestry is only going to grow because our cities are growing. And our area is of course rapidly urbanizing or suburbanizing if you're looking a little further out from just Raleigh into Wake Forest and Garner and other, Apex, all these towns, and that kind of ring around the big cities is going to get bigger and bigger with suburbs further and further out. Um, which means clearing, which means clear cutting, which means new neighborhoods going up. Um, and so now you're not managing large stands of forests. You're managing a tree here and a tree there.
Mm-hmm.
But those individual trees now are super, super important because that's what you have to provide your shade and cooling and rainwater absorption and all these other functions that trees serve. So, it just magnifies the importance of each individual tree. So yeah, I mean, urban forestry is only going to get more important. The growth here is not slowing down, not for right now. We're one of the most rapidly growing areas in the whole country. So as we lose stands of forests, individual trees planted by people for people, and for all the other benefits to everybody else in the environment,
Mm-hmm.
um, they're just gonna grow in importance.
No, that's really, really cool and really important because, yeah, like you were saying, this is such a new and up and coming, or, well, not new and up and coming, but so many people have been moving here as of the last like decade. And so it's really important that, yeah, in these new neighborhoods, they have those trees that they need. Um, but I can only imagine that along with all the good that you guys do, there's a lot of challenges that you guys have to face especially being a nonprofit and you might not have as much funds as you need. But could you kind of let us know if like what the biggest challenges that you guys face, or what kind of policies or local changes would help make bigger differences in urban forestry?
Well, one interesting thing to note is that the General Assembly really kind of has a hold on how individual municipalities control their urban trees as far as what kind of laws a city can put in place to protect trees um, when somebody develops a lot or something, for instance. So that I think is something a lot of people don't know, is that it's not always up to your city, or else if the city at this point kind of pushes the envelope with a tree code that's seen as too restrictive to the General Assembly can basically take away the right of that city to have a tree code or tree ordinance at all.
Wow.
So that's sitting in downtown Raleigh at the Assembly
Mm.
building. That power sits there. So that's an interesting phenomenon. Um, and then I mean, if we're talking about we've got a lot of builders building homes, and we need homes because there's a lot of demand, and housing prices skyrocket when demand skyrockets. So that's to be predicted, right? So if we're building homes, I would love to see builders be able to figure out a way to plant more than what is currently the bare minimum, which is not a lot. I mean, if you go to a new neighborhood and you see kind of the standard one lollipop
Yep.
tree per front yard, it's
Mm.
like I think we could do a little bit better than that. Um, and I think sometimes the builders, to their side of things, their point of view, they'll say, well, I'm required to do X, Y, and Z by the city. Anything else costs money, or else, when I'm required to plant street trees, they required me to do um, X number of trees per Y number of feet down the street, and it's got to be a 3-inch caliber tree, which is a big tree to plant to begin with. So,
Mm.
that's expensive, and they don't want to do any more than they need to. So, trying to figure out how we could get a lot more trees, even if we start them smaller. A 3-foot tree planted every 20 feet to
Mm.
me is more beneficial than a tree that starts out at 12 feet tall, um, being spaced out every 100 feet or whatever it is. So basically, just if we could plant more trees, even if they start smaller, a diverse arrangement of them as well, not the same tree down every front yard. If
Mm.
I see a street with one lone red maple planted in every front yard, it makes me cry a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. It there's conservation and preservation on one side of things, and then just if we can't do that, when we can't do that, at least let's pack in new ones. So um, I'm not a huge policy wonk or expert for sure. I'm just a tree guy, but whatever we can do, and sometimes it's it might be um, some kind of incentive rather than we always think about the carrot and the stick, and people
Mhm.
are quick to like, let's use the stick to like beat down the businesses that are building our homes so that they have to do X what we want. Well, it's like I'm trying to at this point consider the carrot. What
Yeah.
would make them want to? And so we've got one developer that we're working with on a couple of projects now. That's our first developer partner,
Mm.
um, where we're trying to help them see how they can do more than what was required. And they're happy to do it. And I mean, because they're not like heartless, soulless people. They just have a job to build houses. So they've been excited that they get the chance to work with us and plant more trees. And their residents of the homes are excited that they get to a greener neighborhood from the jump. And so it's something that I think can work for everybody. It doesn't have to be a clash of titans here. We could figure this out.
That's really cool, especially that you guys have started working with other developers because, like you were saying, yeah, it is so much kind of reliant on like the companies, the building companies, like what they want to do, and so it's really just like, yeah, working together because it does benefit everyone, not just like one side. So that's really awesome that you guys are kind of making those movements, making those connections to hopefully in the future you'll be working with so many more developers, so many more land neighborhood things. But because, yeah, the amount of times like you go to Apex and you drive down a neighborhood street and it's like you were saying, the one tree in the yard, the one, and there's like no other trees anywhere. And so, not only, like you were saying, will it help the neighborhood, but it also help the area just in general. Um, but that's awesome. How do you see urban forestry evolving over the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, it's not a new field, but I think it is a growing field, and that's only going to expand. We're gonna, urban forestry is going to be something that I hope is something that employs a lot more people, that people in a lot more, not just big cities, but small towns on up are thinking about um, as they grow. And so I'm hoping that's going to be a growing field of well-trained professionals who know how to care for trees, know which trees we need to plant, etc. The other, you know, elephant in the room is, well, is our climate going to change?
Mm,
Is heat coming our way? We are seeing some creep of the range of tree species,
mm,
where they are starting to reach a little further north and maybe lose a little bit of their southern range. And so obviously that's not something that happens typically quickly.
mm,
But if humans are involved in natural process, we tend to speed things up, right? So if we're kind of artificially thinking about, well, we know where these temperatures are going to head and what things are going to look like, we may start doing things like planting trees that I would typically find more in the coastal plain region, like live oak or
mm,
something. May make its way up here more and more. Um, and that's, there's going to be people on either side of that's kind of a debate. Should we be doing that on purpose, or should we fight it to the last tree to try and keep exactly what was here before? And I can see both. I can sympathize with both sides of that argument, because we don't want to lose any of our beautiful native trees that we have here. But I think, especially in an urban environment, which can be really tough on a tree, because you're talking about it could be bone dry one day and flood the next. It could be the highest of heats, especially if you're surrounded by asphalt and things that are, reflecting heat off of them.
mm.
You've got to put a tree in that can handle a pretty tough set of scenarios there. So um, we may be seeing some changes in what we're planting. Um, I'm also That's kind of a doom and gloom type thing to talk about. So I also want to say I hope that what we're going to do is also find some ways to bring back some of the trees that were hugely important in urban spaces. Every town has an Elm Street, and a lot of towns have a Chestnut Avenue and things like that. So we lost our American chestnut and we lost our American elm. Um, but I am hoping that as the science grows and evolves and we figure some things out, whether it's through breeding programs or CRISPR or whatever the new technologies are, and God help us, maybe AI will help us figure this out. But I'd love to hopefully see the return of some of the species that we lost uh, due to, globalization, and we had the
Mm-hmm.
chestnut blight, and Dutch elm disease. Dutch elm disease and chestnut blight, two diseases that knocked those hugely important trees out where we used to have elms lining our streets. Hopefully, we're gonna find a way to bring those back. And so that would just be a big day for us if we could be planting more of those again. So some positives and some negatives, but I think overall, urban forestry is going to grow as a profession, and it's going to get more important because, and I'm hoping more people will realize this. Trees are important infrastructure. We think of infrastructure being the concrete, the power lines, the Wi-Fi, whatever, these human
Mm.
artificial things being infrastructure, but we have green infrastructure, things like trees, uh, that are just as important to the continued existence of life in cities, because we have to have shade from our trees. We've got to keep our soils from eroding and our streets from flooding. And so slowing down and absorbing rainwater is a huge function of urban trees. So, I think hopefully more and more people are going to realize just how important urban
Oh yeah,
forestry
most
is.
definitely. And it's really interesting what you were saying earlier about because I feel like when people think about climate change, they don't really think about how it's affecting the native plants in areas and how it might be moving those where they grow and but that's really interesting to think about and especially what you're saying with um how in the future it might turn into more where we're reviving these older extinct species, which is just really, really cool to think about. And also, it's just really important, like you were saying, because so many, especially with climate change and the crazy natural phenomena like flooding all over, that's very important for trees to be in these areas and just to have them in general. So that was really cool. Really, really interesting. Um,
Hmm.
how can residents and listeners get involved in the program, even if they don't have space to plant trees themselves? I know you were talking about the pay it forward. Does that count if you aren't getting any trees? Can you still donate money for that?
I will take your money. I will be happy to take your money. Uh, yeah. So if you want a tree, certainly there's a form on our website. You can request a tree for your house, or if you run an HOA in the triangle and you want to try and do a kind of
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood wide planting, we can do that. Um, but if you don't have room for a tree, as you mentioned, we would love donations, of course, or feel free to come sign up to help at any of our volunteer events as well, because we have stuff going on pretty much throughout the year. Um, whether it is during our tree planting season, which runs October through April, or in the summer when we're going back and taking care of
Mm.
areas where we have planted trees, maybe taking out invasive species or remulching some things to help build up soil around the trees in a positive way. So there is something to do all year round, and we list all of our volunteer activities on activategood.org. Activate Good. I'll plug another local nonprofit because I love doing that. Activate Good is a nonprofit that helps nonprofits find volunteers and volunteers
Oh,
find
awesome.
volunteer opportunities. So they're awesome. And we list all of our volunteer stuff up online there. And then we also have a monthly newsletter. We don't like to spam people, so one a month should do it. If you want to sign up for our newsletter and get that email once a month, that's on our website as well, which, oh, by the way, is treesforthetriangle.org. Um, try and keep it simple. But yeah, we would love to see new faces out planting trees with us, mulching trees with us. If you want to write a big fat check, I'll take that every day of the week. as well.
Awesome. Well, as we kind of come up to the end of our chat, I just want to thank you again so much for coming in and telling us all about the Trees for Triangle and what a wonderful organization that it is. And it's something that's really, really important that I feel a lot of people kind of don't think about. But it's really awesome seeing or hearing how you guys are evolving and just knowing that you guys are going to keep on evolving throughout the years. And my final question for you is, do you have a favorite tree species?
I have a standard answer for the question. I don't know that I
Mm.
truly have a favorite tree because whichever one I'm looking at usually tends to be the one that is my favorite. But my my favorite tree
Mm.
is a sycamore. I love when you get a mature sycamore and it's got just bone
Mm-hmm.
white bark. It's just really interesting. And then that fiery red, orange, yellow fall color is fantastic. So that's one of my
Awesome.
faves for
Love to
sure.
hear it. True.
But it's
I
hard
can
to pick
imagine.
one.
There's just so many. It's almost like picking a favorite song or something.
Yeah,
Mhm. But,
exactly,
well,
exactly.
thank you so, so much for everything, for coming in to talk and for giving our listeners such good information. And as we come up on the end of our chat, I just want to thank you all again for listening. And I want to thank Dave for coming in and giving us such amazing information about Trees for the Triangle. It's a really important nonprofit, and I think you guys should definitely try and get involved if you can. Um, But thank you all for listening to Oak City Move. Once again, I'm your host, Sophia Magnanini, and if you're interested in listening to this episode again or to past episodes of the show, you can go to wknc.org/podcast and make sure to tune into our show every other Monday on WKNC 88.1 FM Raleigh. Have a great day, y'all.